Shalom, who praises to Yahweh, Ba'ashem El Shai, Ba'ashem Harakah Kodash. Double honors unto the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who rule well. And shalom to those who elect. It's Paya Allah. It's a biblical commentary on the book of Deuteronomy, Salakia, Daniel, the first chapter, which reads, in the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Yerushalayim and besieged it. Right, and they have these precepts, the precepts, Lakia, up there, 2 King 24, 10 to 17. Good precept worth reading, even reading those few chapters, because it speaks of the onset of the kingdom of Judah going into captivity, around how the choice, what is really is a contemporary this chapter, but as it progresses, it speaks on other events that happened, like when Esau burnt down the temple, and how the land was left with all the poor in the land, but all the the great people, the people of renown, were basically taken for the benefit of Babylon. Right, goes into that, but that's something I want to go into, expound upon, because with the king Jehoiakim, as we kind of progress through this book, maybe I'll just really nip it in the bud in this chapter. I don't think I'll be able to keep this in the point in mind to the next chapter. But yeah, as I'll read on, I'll speak to that point. Verse 2, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, and part of the vessels of the house of the Most High. Yeah, and that goes into 2 Kings, the 24th chapter, because as you read into it, you have his, I can't recall it, because the way it was wrote, it kind of plays on my mind. It's not, I haven't got it in a holster like that, but basically you had, I want to say Zedekiah, I can't remember the name of the king, but basically he was set up as like a puppet by Nebuchadnezzar, but basically the Heavenly Father started plaguing him, and he rebelled and started doing the things that pleased the Heavenly Father, but then wind up ultimately getting caught, having his sons his family killed before his eyes, and then having his eyes removed and taken into captivity, which is some judgment from the Heavenly Father, man. Right? So let's read this again, verse 2. And the Lord gave Joachim, king of Judah, into his hand, and part of the vessels of the house of the Most High, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his power. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning of the tongue of the Chaldeans. And this point I'm going to speak to speaks to this, because look, what men were sought out, all right? Certain children of Israel, the king's seed, and of the princes, men that had great titles, illustrious titles in the kingdom of Israel, in the kingdom of Judah, should I say, all right? And that the Chaldeans were basically gonna go through the midst of them, basically designate, certain individuals to be within their kingdom, all right, to work to their benefit. Verse 5, and the king appointed them daily provision of the king's meat, and wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel, all right, the name Belshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego, all right? So true to captivity, all right, they basically got named after their captors Just like in this kingdom, you have the children of Israel today. Judah, for example, over there in the land of America, you've got last names like McNabb, Jacob, uh, Jacobs, Jackson. Uh, what's the other son that they use a lot? Jackson and it's right on, not Jordan, Jackson and Washington. These different last names, basically. All right, and even they name their children so far so that even in Atlanta down there, you have them with the Greek kind of names, Quavacius and Novatius, all that kind of Greek sounding stuff. It's cool over there because of the boule down there. All right, but basically showing that what they take after their captors. All right. So it says, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with wine which he drank. Therefore he requested the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Yeah, because at the king's table would have been all forms of dainties. And remember, the king is a heathen. So they would have had all forms of food, all manner of food before them, all right? That would have been unclean, but would have been rich, in so-called flavor and taste. Now, the Most High had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs, yeah, because what he who pleased the Most High, even his enemies shall be at peace with him, all right? Because as well, in that understanding of the Most High, we understand that the enemy bears not the sword in vain, because under the sun there's a time for everything, a time and season for everything. So you have to move accordingly, all right? As Nazir Ben Rod said, man, I'm playing around, man. He said it in Take It in Blood, my actions are one with the seasons. That's the prophets, man. They move according to the time and the season, right? They're mindful, circumspect, and can see everything, all right? But that doesn't mean they conform. It just means that, they do work accordingly. But if you go against the Heavenly Father, all right, or would like them to, that's when they draw the line. Verse 10, and the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who have appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king. Yeah, because look, basically the king was allowing them to eat at his table, to basically eat the rich, dainty foods that he eats. And what the God proposed was that he's saying, look, man, if you don't eat this food, you're going to lack in visage and it's going to be obvious. And then the king is going to be upset with me and want my head in the charger. So what he was basically saying is whatever the king is eating is the best that can be found. This is the king of the world right now. And you don't want to eat at his table, you're bugging, all right? You ain't right. You ain't all there in the head. You ain't all the way there, basically. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Salakia, my man, wondering. Verse 11, then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. And I believe the word there for pulse, I looked it up before, it goes, is not Zarai, Zawarai, something to that effect. Zawarai, I believe. Which basically means seed. Zara'ai one. That's it. Zara'ai. Zara'ain. Zara'ain. Alright, Zara'ain. Which basically means vegetable pulse. You can look it up. I didn't even read it properly. I was kind of blowing through it. But let me read on. So it says, Post, verse 12, prove thy service, I beseech you, 10 days, and let them give us post to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he consented to them in his matter and proved them 10 days. So as an experiment, right? He wanted to prove them, see, experience what it is to deal with the posts as opposed to dealing with the dainties of rich food of the king's table. Verse 15, and at the end of the 10 days, their countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. All right, so what had he opposed at the beginning, it was the opposite. They basically looked more fairer in complexion, all right, of the countenance, meaning they had a fullness to their face, they had a richness, that Bruce Leroy glow, okay, glowing like I just came home. Slack it, man. I'm gonna stop with this Nas and Nature rap bars and all that. Verse 16, thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink and gave them posts. Now this is even a big thing because Daniel, he basically was prominent. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were prominent figures from, as it tells you in the last verse of this chapter, from Nebuchadnezzar until the time of Cyrus, which is basically into the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, when you saw in the Kushite Empire dealing with the Babylonians, you have the Ethiopians are heavily known for their vegan meals, their vegetable meals. And then you also have the same with what? Elam. Down there in India, they're known for being vegetarians as well. Now, where did they get that from? I'd deduce that they got it from these great men that had great pull within their kingdoms, in their realms. All right? Verse 17. As for these 4 children, the Most High gave them knowledge, skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days of the king, that the king has said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among all of them was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Where therefore stood they before the king. All right, so they basically were, he wanted to go toe to toe with them. This is the head of the statue, mind you, the greatest of all the nations. He was heavy. He was into wisdom, right? And this is, remember, the Chaldees going back to Abraham, the abacus, which goes back to Abraham, with algebra and mathematics that was taught in Egypt, as it tells you, Josephus. This is that same place where Abraham had left, meaning Awar in the Lashwan Kodash, which is light of the Chaldees, because they were known for their wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. They were heavy into that. Right, and this is the same thing that is being shown here by King Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 20, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than, not 1 time, not 2, not 3, but 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even unto the first year of King Cyrus. Now, mind you, remember Daniel was a civilian within the nation, the kingdom of Judah, all right? And you had all those seeds that were wrought and were educated, and that the king wanted to determine. But through the Spirit, who was chosen to rise to prominence? Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, all right? And you had you would have the king, Jehoiakim was there as well, the princes, men that would have all kind of reign and pull over Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Well, not speakers. I don't know if Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, but the point being, Daniel in itself, these men weren't the king, all right? Which even just shows you being a prophet of the Lord is the highest tier of it all right? You had the king governing the nation of Israel, or the nation of the kingdom of Judah, should I say, but he weren't on the same level as those 4 great men, all right? Showing you the power of knowing that word, the testimony of Yahushua being the spirit of prophecy. So with that, I pray you're edified to the next one. Say shalom, shalom.